Most people do not have an income problem. They have a leak problem. That is the first truth you need to hear. And if it makes you uncomfortable, good discomfort is often the beginning of accuracy. I have watched people make more money, get better jobs, collect bigger bonuses, and still stay financially weak because the structure underneath their life was built like a damaged tank. More money went in, more stress came out, more effort went in, more freedom failed to appear. They kept telling themselves that the next raise would fix it. It usually did not, because a leaking tank does not become secure just because you pour faster. That is how ordinary people stay trapped for 20 years. They think wealth is about how much water they can carry from the well. I think wealth is about whether the tank keeps it. If it does not, the labor becomes punishment. You spend your life hauling buckets while the future stays thirsty. You call that adulthood. I call it a bad operating system. And the worst part is that most people do not even know where the leaks are. They think they are being normal. They think everybody lives like this. They think getting paid, paying everything else first, saving whatever is left, carrying a little debt, guessing at expenses, upgrading life with every raise, delaying investing until they feel ready, and letting taxes and inflation chew through the edges is just how life works. Number, that is not how life works. That is how a damaged financial tank works. I want to show you the damage the way I see it, not as isolated bad habits, not as polite little money tips, not as some clean spreadsheet where every problem sits in its own box. I want to show you the system, because once you see the system, you stop treating money weakness like a character flaw and start treating it like a leak map. And if you are honest, you already know this feeling. You work, but you do not feel stronger. You save, but the number never seems to stay saved. You make progress, but the progress feels reversible. You avoid catastrophe, but you do not build power. That is what a leaking tank feels like. It is not dramatic enough to call a disaster. It is just exhausting enough to steal your future. The first leak is the most socially accepted one, which is why it ruins so many people. They pay themselves last. I have no patience for that habit. If every person in your life gets paid before your future gets paid, then do not pretend you are serious about freedom. Rent gets paid, phone bill gets paid, subscriptions get paid, dinner gets paid, social plans get paid, random purchases get paid. Then at the end of the month, if something small survives the feeding frenzy, you call it saving. That is not saving. That is begging the leftovers of your own life to become your future. I want you to think about what that really means psychologically. When you pay yourself last, you are teaching your brain that your future is optional and everybody else's claim is urgent. You are telling your nervous system that freedom can wait, but convenience cannot. That is a disastrous hierarchy. And once the mind accepts that hierarchy, it starts protecting the wrong things. It protects the present self from discomfort and leaves the future self underfunded, underpowered, and overexposed. This is how financial weakness becomes automatic. You do not need a giant catastrophe to create it. You just need the wrong order repeated enough times. That is why I like forcing the issue. The moment money comes in, a fixed piece should go to you first, not because it is motivational, because it is structural. 10% is not magical. 20% is not magical. The percentage is not the point. The order is the point. Your future must become a bill that gets paid before the world starts feeding on your cash flow. Order creates walls, wrong order creates leaks. That leads directly to the second leak, bad debt, which is less a leak and more a hole punched through the side of the tank. With a power drill, I want to be clear here. The modern world has normalized consumer debt so completely that people barely flinch anymore. Clothes on credit, gifts on credit, dinners on credit, random wants on credit. They behave as if the ability to borrow has transformed stupidity into strategy. It has not. It has simply delayed embarrassment and multiplied the bill. The average credit card rate mentioned in your source was around 22%, and that is exactly the kind of number that tells you the game is not designed for your benefit. A 22% interest rate does not care that the purchase was small. It does not care that the points sounded attractive. It does not care that the app made the checkout feel smooth. That rate is an extraction machine. It is a private tax farm attached to impatience. This is why I say high-interest consumer debt is not just expensive. It is anti-wealth. It cancels discipline. It punishes progress. It makes every future dollar weaker because part of your future labor now belongs to an old decision you already stopped enjoying. The people who sell that debt understand something most users refuse to understand. Small emotional decisions made repeatedly create reliable streams of future servitude. That is the model. They do not need you to be reckless one time. They need you to get comfortable with controlled weakness, comfortable enough that debt becomes a lifestyle accessory instead of an emergency bridge. Once that happens, the leak is no longer financial, only it becomes moral. You start accepting a life where your wants arrive in the present and your effort arrives later. That pattern corrodes discipline everywhere. You stop respecting delay, you stop respecting price, you stop respecting the difference between desire and capacity. And once that respect dies, real wealth becomes almost impossible to build, because real wealth is made out of delayed gratification stacked on top of repeated good judgment. You cannot build a strong tank while you are drilling holes in it for convenience. Now let us go deeper, because debt is not the only thing that weakens a person. Fragility weakens them too. This is the third leak, and it catches people who think they are being responsible while they are actually being exposed. No emergency reserve, no real buffer, no 6-month cushion, no breathing room. That is not bravery. That is a naked financial life. If your tank has no reserve chamber, then every ordinary event becomes a potential emergency. A car repair is not annoying. It is destabilizing. A delayed paycheck is not inconvenient. It is dangerous. A medical bill is not just stressful. It is structural sabotage. Without a buffer, life stops being a sequence of manageable events and starts becoming a chain of forced bad decisions. You borrow when you should wait. You sell when you should hold. You panic when you should think. You say yes when you should refuse. This is where ordinary people mistake survival for progress. They say, I am handling it. No, you are reacting to it. Handling it would mean the event lands and the structure absorbs it without forcing you into stupidity. That is what a reserve chamber is for. It is not there to flatter you. It is there to prevent your future from being sold at a discount every time reality behaves like reality. A 6-month buffer is not glamorous. Good. I distrust glamorous finance. Glamorous finance usually makes somebody else rich first. What protects ordinary people is usually boring and deeply practical: liquidity, cash reserve, dry powder, call it whatever you want. It is the inner water line that keeps the system from cracking during stress. Without it, you do not have a tank. You have a bucket with a brave face. And that brings me to another leak. Most people do not want a face because it sounds too simple to be profound. They do not know their own numbers. They do not know income properly. They do not know expenses properly. They do not know what comes in, what goes out, what part is fixed, what part is emotional, what part is avoidable, what part rises whenever income rises, and what part is quietly expanding while they tell themselves they are still basically the same. That is financial blindness. I do not care how ambitious you are, if you refuse to look at the black and white numbers of your own life. Fantasy is not a plan. Hope is not a system. A person who claims to want wealth but cannot tell you what his money is doing each month is not building. He is drifting. And drifting is what creates lifestyle inflation. This is one of the most elegant leaks because it hides under success. You make more, and instead of thickening the tank, you enlarge the demands on it. Bigger house, better car, better furniture, better restaurants, more subscriptions, more polished self-image. Every income increase is treated like a command to upgrade the costume rather than reinforce the structure. That is how people remain fragile at higher income levels. They are not getting richer, they are getting more expensive. This is the status leak. And it ruins enormous numbers of people because it feels rewarding while it is happening. You tell yourself you earned it. Maybe you did. But earning a treat and being able to carry the long-term weight of that treat are two different questions. Most people never separate them. So the tank grows, but the consumption holes grow with it. The net result is the same old weakness in nicer packaging. I have watched high earners live like overextended actors, good salary, nice outward life, tiny real margin. The minute pressure arrives, the whole thing starts shaking because the appearance of wealth has replaced the structure of wealth. That is why tracking numbers matters so much. The numbers do not flatter you. They reveal you. They show whether you are actually accumulating or just scaling the size of your obligations. If you want freedom, you need that kind of honesty. Not because spreadsheets are noble, because vagueness is expensive. Then there is the hobby leak, which people love to romanticize because it lets them hide spending inside identity. This is just what I enjoy. Fine, enjoyment is not a crime. But if your pleasures are systematically more expensive than your structure can handle, they are not harmless hobbies. They are recurring extraction systems: shopping, gear, collecting, frequent travel, luxury entertainment, convenience spending, and all the little emotional rewards people scatter through the week can become chronic pressure valves on the tank. Again, the issue is not whether a person should ever spend money on pleasure. I am not preaching monkhood. I am talking about control. A hobby is harmless when it fits inside a deliberate structure. It becomes a leak when it demands funding every time your mood drops or your ego needs stimulation. At that point, it stops being pleasure and starts being an emotional tax. This is where weak people get angry because they do not want spending analyzed in strategic terms. They want immunity. They want the right to call every leak self and every indulgence balance. I am not impressed by the language. Language does not change the math. If the behavior drains the tank faster than the system can replenish it, it is a leak, whether you call it passion, rest, reward, or community. That is the ruthless view. It is also the useful one. Now here is another point that almost nobody gets right, and it is one of the most important lines in your source material. You cannot build wealth by saving alone. Saving has a ceiling, earning has a much higher ceiling. This is the sixth leak, the saving. Only trap. A lot of people become obsessed with tiny economies because tiny economies feel controllable. Cash back here, coupon there, a cheaper subscription here, a better grocery trick there, fine. Do sensible things. I am not against efficiency, but do not confuse trimming the edges with building the engine. If your entire money strategy is based on making your current income slightly less wasteful while you do almost nothing to raise your earning power, you are still operating inside a small tank. I want you to understand the emotional reason people hide inside saving. Saving feels disciplined. Earning more feels uncertain. To earn more, you may need to ask for a raise, build a skill, change jobs, start something on the side, invest in your competence. Tolerate temporary embarrassment, risk rejection, move industries, or learn how money is actually made. That is much harder than clipping small leaks at the edges. So people choose the form of discipline that flatters their identity while leaving the main growth question untouched. That is not serious capital behavior. If you want real strength, you need both sides of the equation, lower leaks and stronger inflows, save more of what you make. Yes, but also attack the size of what you make. Skill, negotiation, side income, ownership, productive assets, business experiments, compounding competence, all of that matters because the making money side is not capped the way saving is. Your source made that point clearly, and it is one of the most commercially valuable truths ordinary people resist. You cannot clip your way to serious wealth if the engine stays weak. At some point, the tank must receive more water with force that requires a better earning machine. And once you begin to earn better, you run into a leak almost nobody likes discussing because it is less visible and more sophisticated taxes. Taxes are one of the biggest expenses in most lives, and the tragedy is not merely that they exist. The tragedy is that ordinary people often pay them with almost no strategy at all. They work, earn, get hit, and accept the result as if the entire structure were fixed and beyond thought. Meanwhile, more sophisticated players use wrappers, accounts, legal structures, and timing decisions to reduce the bleed. Now, let me be precise. I am not talking about anything illegal. I am talking about knowledge, tax-advantaged accounts, business structures where appropriate, understanding the rules well enough that you stop volunteering extra leakage, simply because you never bothered to learn the system. The rich are not always richer because they are morally superior or even more talented. Very often they are simply operating with a better leak map. They know that if you can shelter dividends, reduce taxable friction, or choose more efficient structures, that difference compounds over decades. An ISA, a Roth IRA, the proper use of business entities when appropriate, location of assets, timing of sales. These things do not sound sexy, which is why lazy minds ignore them. But boring tax efficiency can build a thicker wall than a lot of exciting stock opinions. Again, the point is not to worship complexity. The point is to stop bleeding unnecessarily. A person who claims to want wealth but refuses to learn how the rules stack against him is not being virtuous. He is being passive. And passivity is expensive. Then we arrive at one of the cruelest leaks of all, because it feels safe while it is happening, waiting too long to invest. This is where a lot of decent people lose decades without realizing it. They save a little, they mean, well, they keep extra money in the bank because it feels reassuring. They tell themselves they will invest later when they know more, when they have more. When the economy is better, when the market dips, when life calms down, when the right moment finally appears, that moment rarely appears. What appears instead is delay. And delay is one of the most expensive taxes in existence because it steals compounding years that can never be bought back cheaply. Inflation is working the whole time. Opportunity is working the whole time. Productive assets are working the whole time. Other people's tanks are thickening while yours sits still because you confuse temporary comfort with long-term security. I want you to feel the danger of this leak. Idle excess cash is not neutral. If it sits beyond what you truly need for a reserve, it is slowly weakening. Inflation does not need to look dramatic to be destructive. It just needs time. And time is precisely what people surrender when they say, "I'll start later." Your source made the right point here too. Once you have the stockpile, the cushion, the reserve, the buffer, call it what you want, the extra money should not just sit there pretending to be safe. It should begin working. Diversified investing, a mix of safer and riskier exposures, sized appropriately, exposure to productive assets, rather than endless passivity. Not reckless gambling, not all. Cash paralysis work, that is the difference between a tank that holds wealth and a tank that lets time evaporate it. Now I want to tie all of this together because the biggest mistake people make is thinking these are separate issues. They are not paying yourself last weekend's the inflow order. Bad debt drills holes. No reserve chamber makes every shock more dangerous. Not knowing your numbers hides the damage. Lifestyle inflation expands the holes as income rises. Expensive hobbies turn mood into recurring leakage. Thinking only about saving caps the incoming force. Ignoring taxes hands away compoundable capital. Waiting too long to invest lets inflation and delay work against you. This is not a list. It is one machine. And that machine determines whether your life becomes a rising reservoir or an endless refill chore. Once you see that, your behavior changes. You stop asking random money questions and start asking structural ones. Where is the water escaping? Which leak is the biggest? Which leak is hidden behind the appearance of responsibility? What order should the inflow follow? How much reserve does the structure need before the rest can be deployed? How do I increase the force of new water entering the system? How do I stop tax and inflation from eating what I already fought to keep? Those are grown-up money questions and grown. Up money questions lead to an entirely different life because a strong tank changes more than your bank balance. It changes your nervous system. When money stops leaking from 9 places at once, you think differently. You do not feel cornered by every expense. You do not need debt for every surprise. You do not panic when the car makes a bad sound. You do not need the next paycheck with the same desperation. You do not say yes to every miserable work situation because the reserve chamber gives you breathing room. You do not need to perform wealth for strangers because the structure is becoming real under the surface. That is the psychological dividend of sound finance: less noise, less panic, less forced obedience, more room. I care about that far more than appearances. The true test of wealth is not whether your life looks luxurious. It is whether your life is hard to destabilize. The person with the better car and no reserves is weaker than the person with the less glamorous life and a sound tank. The person with the polished image and constant debt is weaker than the person with the ordinary image and rising productive assets. The person waiting for the perfect time to invest is weaker than the person already compounding quietly. Weak people hate that truth because it is not cinematic. Strong people use it. Now let me show you what the repair process looks like in plain language. First, fix the order. Pay yourself first. Your future must be funded before the world starts billing you. This is the inlet valve. Second, stop the high. Pressure holes kill bad debt. Not slowly in spirit while keeping the lifestyle that caused it. Ruthlessly, in fact. Third, build the reserve chamber until ordinary life stops being able to push you into stupid decisions. Fourth, measure the system. Know your income, know your expenses, know your lifestyle creep. See the numbers in black and white until vagueness loses its power. Fifth, control the emotional leaks, hobbies, shopping, identity spending. All of it if it drains the tank faster than your structure can support. Resize it. Sixth, attack the earning engine. Saving more is honorable. Earning more expands what is possible. You need both. Seventh, learn the tax map. Stop confusing. Ignorance with purity. Eighth, once the reserve is real, push the excess into productive assets so time works with you instead of against you. Notice how all of that feels less like self-help and more like engineering. Good, that is what money deserves. Engineering, not vibes, not slogans, not temporary enthusiasm. The people who become strong are not usually the people with the most dramatic personality. They are the people who stop the leaks, increase the inflow, keep the reserve, and let time multiply what remains. That sounds boring because reality often is, but boring systems are what make freedom possible. A plane in the air depends on an enormous amount of boring engineering. So does wealth. Ignore the boring parts, and one day you do not have a glamorous life problem, you have a crash. I would rather sound severe now than comforting now and useless later. So here is the final truth. A leaking tank can make a decent income feel poor. A sealed tank can make a modest income become powerful. That is the whole game. Not how hard you work only. Not how much you talk about money. Not how rich you look. How much of what enters your life is captured, protected, multiplied, and kept under your control. That is why I do not ask first, how much do you make? I ask what happens to the money after it reaches you, because that answer decides almost everything. If it arrives and immediately gets assigned to other people, to old debt, to untracked spending, to status leaks, to tax ignorance, and to inflation decay in an idle account, then the problem is not merely income. The tank is broken. If it arrives, pays your future first, strengthens the reserve, avoids expensive holes, gets measured properly, funds a larger earning engine, reduces friction, and then moves into productive assets, then time begins doing what most people only talk about. It starts helping you, and that is when life changes. Not in the dramatic fake way people hope for, in the real way, less fear, more margin, more refusal power, more control, a stronger future that no longer depends on you carrying every bucket forever. So ask yourself one hard question. Are you spending the next decade trying to earn more water for a broken tank, or are you finally ready to seal the structure, build pressure, and let your money stay long enough to become a force? That choice will decide more than your salary ever will.